which is funny because most people that aren't in Bitcoin look at me and they're like, "Yeah, you're just a young guy trying to make a quick buck in Bitcoin. You just want Bitcoin to double overnight." It's like, no, I want Bitcoin price to be down. We're recording this. Bitcoin's down like 7% today. Like I said earlier, it's like I'm happy. I feel good because
Yeah.
that means I can buy more Bitcoin, my worthless political currency, that
Mm.
in 100 years my kids are going to steward to, support more missionaries or do whatever, they deem as worthy. But like to me, that's enough fruit in of itself. So yeah, I think you're bringing up great points there. So that's the future. I guess a little really quickly to backtrack to the past, where do you think we went wrong? Like, yeah, it was just 1 or 2 generations ago where that was common, that people knew men and women were different, where people, worshipped at home, where people, like where budgets were balanced, right? I mean,
Mm.
one doesn't even have to be a Christian to realize that, but it's just that society 80 years ago or 100 years ago was so much more moral. Obviously, the obvious answer is fiat, but if you could elaborate on that, that's where we're going. Where do you think we went wrong? And how, more importantly, can we prevent from repeating those errors in a generation two? How can we raise up our kids to not make the mistakes we and our parents and the generations before us did?
Well, we went wrong when we thought we knew better than God. And I don't know if I can really pinpoint exactly when that happened. It's been happening in so
Adam and
many.
Eve.
Well, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's true. That's when it went wrong. And the solution, God has been giving us the solution, and it's been a cyclical thing. You read Judges, just read the book of Judges, and you'll kind of get a general overview of human history, right? People do that which is wicked in the sight of the Lord, and then they have some kind of calamity or hardship. They call on God, they humble themselves, and then it gets better, and then around and around and around, it keeps happening in that same way. And so I don't know, I would think we're in the cycle at the end of maybe an empire here. But the thing is, this thing can be drawn out very long, for at least from our perspective. Like we look at 100 years and we think, boy, that's long, because you probably will only live within that block of time, right? You think about 100-year block of time, you're probably living in that block, maybe 60, 70, 80, if you're lucky, of those years. So that's a long time for us because that's our whole life. But in the broad spectrum of history, that's not very long at all. I mean, the end of the US dollar empire could drag on another 100 years. It could. It might. We don't know. And so we're going to be living in that if that's the case. So the question becomes, how do we live now so that when this thing dies, or our progeny is not thrown under the bus? So where we went wrong, yeah, it's the same. It's the same every time. We forsake God. We think we're smarter than God, and this is a conversation I get into a lot with atheists online. Is they have a lot of questions and stuff, and sometimes they're sincere and sometimes they're not sincere. But at the end of the day, I think we all have to humble ourselves and just realize perhaps God knows more than us. Maybe he's smarter than us. Maybe there's something we're missing in this picture here. We're only here for just a blip of time, and we want to sit in the judgment seat against God and say, God, why this and why that? Maybe just humble yourself, take a step back, and go, maybe there's more to the picture that I don't know. So what
Yeah.
can I do now in
But
order to
mhm.
to live in a way that will bless the future, um, and and ensure, well, maybe not ensure, but basically you can only be accountable for yourself, maybe is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good point. And, ultimately that's what gets back to sin, right? People are like, oh, well, I'm a good person. I don't need God. But then the reality is that, you're a good person in your own eyes, in your own sense of morality, right? Ultimately, you're taking your own sense of morality of what's good and wrong and putting it above God's, right? So, you bring up a good
But
point there.
even
Mhm.
even then, though,
Yeah,
you don't even live up to your own standard, right? That's the
good
thing.
point.
There's a who was that biker? Who was the biker that got caught with the steroids? Michael, no, not Michael Phelps. That's the swimmer.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think his name's Lance Armstrong, right?
Lance Armstrong. I always use the illustration of Lance Armstrong when people say, "Well, I make my own rules." You're not even good in your own sight. You look at a guy like Lance Armstrong, who wrote the book, and in his book he wrote something about I don't need God to be good, right? He said I can make my own standards and
Yeah.
morals, and I'm good of dude,
Yeah.
he broke his own thing, right? He's a sinner even in his own sight, right? If Lance Armstrong sits in judgment against Lance Armstrong sends Lance Armstrong to hell
But
because
Lance
he
Armstrong is God and Lance Armstrong's worldview. So he comparted himself.
but he sinned
Yeah.
against his own self, right? He said, "These are my morals. I'm a good person." Then he broke them, and he was exposed. So, you know, even when people say, I'm the judge." Well, dude, even within your own framework, you are still a sinner. So no matter how
Right.
you break it down, you're a sinner.
Yeah. Well, okay. One more question on this topic, Alan, is that, I think most people agree with what you said. We're only on Earth for a short period of time. We have to humble ourselves. We don't know everything in the universe. But then, Alan, why the heck? Why God? Why Bible? Why Jesus? It's like, Alan, aren't you arrogant for you saying of all the gods that have ever been made up in history, of all the worldviews that have ever been established or created? It's like, yes, I agree with you to be humble, but then you go against your own self and saying you have the answers to the universe because some goat herders a few thousand years ago wrote it. What's your answer to that?
Yeah, so my answer to that is that the Christian worldview is the only one that has the necessary preconditions to even make sense of logic and reasoning to begin with. So there's certain preconditions and presuppositions you have whenever you make a truth claim. Number one, truth exists. Yeah, maybe that's the most fundamental important one. So when an atheist says, "Oh, there is no God," what you're doing is you're making a truth claim. You're asserting a positive truth claim. There is no God. Really, what is truth? How do you account for truth? How do you account? So the preconditions of atheism can't even account for the existence of atheism. There are no there in atheism. It's just basically natural uh, chemical reactions working with each other, right? So there's the illustration of the fizz. My brain is just gray matter in my head. Your brain is just gray matter in your head. All that is happening here is there's electrons firing. You can think of it like fizz, like a soda can. Um, my brain fires to say God is real, Jesus is real, he's risen from the dead. Your brain is firing and telling you, no, that's stupid, that's fake, it's dumb. Which fizz is correct?
I think that's what people would say is that you don't know. Like in your
Well,
mind, Jesus
there
is
there
real.
is no there is no correct. It's just fizz, right? So arguing against fizz makes no sense. It's just chemical reactions. There is no right, there is no wrong. In this worldview, there is no basis for arguing for any truth claim because whatever is just is. It's as silly as arguing the Coke fizz is correct and the 7 Up fizz is wrong. No, it's just fizz. It's just chemical reaction. So the Christian worldview is the only one with the necessary preconditions for logic, for reason. I can actually account for these things with my worldview. You cannot. It's a baseless, pointless conversation. If you really don't believe in God, then why even bother having the conversation? It's just brain fizz. And which brain fizz is right? I have the Christian sorry, I have the Christian brain fizz. You have the atheist brain fizz. Neither is right. It just is. So just accept it. So that's how I would answer the atheist according to his own folly, lest he become puffed up in his own thinking. And on
Well,
top of that, so go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, to me, the point you're getting at is objectivity versus subjectivity, right? The problem with political currency and fiat currency is subjectivity to what's the real ledger, what's the set of numbers that's the real one, right? Like I don't know how many US dollars there are. Not even Jerome Powell probably knows how many US dollars are. Like, it's completely subjective. The male female thing, that's, oh, gender is subjective, not objective, right? When it comes to morality and truth, sin in the Christian worldview is the subjective nature of I know what's right and wrong. I can take the fruit. I know better. The serpent is right. That did God really say? Like my worldview of morality is subjective, right? Like I know better. Again, in contrast with objectivity, and that seems to be the point you're bringing up here is that um, if one is to accept there is objective truth, well, then one has to ask, okay, how is the objective truth decided and who makes that subjective truth? So I agree with you there in that, the subjective worldview, I think, falls apart on its own argument. But
Yeah.
even for those that do have an objective view that there is truth and is not, isn't then Jesus and the Bible just a subjective opinion on what objective truth is? Or do you have an argument as to that? So going one step further
Yeah.
and counter to the argument you just gave, like, okay, let's agree there's objective truth, but why is your subjective opinion or your subjective brain fizz correct and saying what truth is? Like, what's the
Well,
backing?
if an atheist is claiming objective truth, they have to first account for that with their worldview, and they can't, you know. So if they're saying, why is your subjective opinion objective, I guess the question doesn't even make sense, right? Atheism cannot account for, see, there's a difference between saying atheists adhere to an objective truth and saying atheists can't account for it with their worldview, right? Obviously, atheists understand, well, most of them at least, they live within a certain framework. They live within a certain moral framework. Well, I'm an atheist and I'm moral. I don't kill people. I don't do this. So what of that? Fine. I know that's true. All you're doing is proving my point that you're made in God's image and you know these things for certain. What I'm saying is your worldview can't account for those. Can't account for those. You're borrowing from the Christian worldview and saying, I'm a good person. Well, based on whose standard? Well, my own. Really? Is it your own? Because it doesn't sound like your own. And even your own standard, you transgress against, anyways. So atheism simply just cannot account for the existence of objective truth. How could you in a purely material world? It's just brain fizz. It's neither right nor wrong.
That reminds me of the point you brought up earlier about how in fiat currency, political currency, two plus two is still four, right? So it's like even in fiat money, when it does, when there is a specific component of the fiat matrix that does make sense, where two plus two does equal four, it's borrowing it from the layer
Exactly.
below, which is math itself, right?
Yeah.
And so you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying a kind of similar thing that, people that aren't believers in God or whatever, they can act moral, but you're saying that they're borrowing that from like the base layer below, right? Do I understand that right?
Yeah, they're borrowing from the Christian worldview in order to, they're basic, and this is the thing, e even logic itself is something that an atheistic worldview can't account for.
Mm.
I always have a chuckle when atheists call themselves reasonable and we're the people of reason. My friend, you can't even account for reason. What is reason in a purely materialistic world? Reason is not material. You can't put it in a test tube. You can't observe and test. It's a metaphysical concept. Logic and reason. That we even have laws of logic. Can you test laws of logic? No, the laws of logic are the laws of logic, no matter where you are. It doesn't change. Um,
Mm.
it comes from somewhere. It comes from an intelligent mind. Even if you don't adhere to the laws of logic, if you're being illogical, guess what? It still exists, just like mathematics. You can not know mathematics exists. It still exists. It's not something. Here's the thing: math, logic, these aren't things we created. These are things we discovered. They were already here. And so, how do you account for those things with your worldview? People will say, well, I've had conversations recently with people say, well, our morality, our reason, our logic evolves. How can it evolve? If it evolves, then therefore it's not objective, it's not true, it's not universal, it's just opinion. And again, you get back to it's just fizz. If fizz is one
Yeah.
way today, if fizz is a different way tomorrow, who cares?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much more we could expand on that. I'm sure we've offended enough people already. And what we said, but hopefully it's interesting to people, even people that disagree with us. I want to end out this part of the conversation just saying that, even the people that disagree with us, I mean, even Alan and I, we have our own disagreements, on Twitter oftentimes, but, hopefully this part's been interesting. Um, I guess wrapping up the conversation, which I really appreciate this. Next time I have you all, we'll have to dive into this more, but Wrapping up the conversation. Okay, we spent most of this time talking about morality, reason, right and wrong, subjectivity, objectivity, money being a layer atop of mathematics, and mathematics being a layer atop, God. And we've talked about all these things, but most people won't click on this video for those things. We have to meet people where they are, right? It's the same way in the Christian world. You got to meet people where they
Sure.
are, and then Jesus, manifests himself in that conversation. Same with Bitcoin. You got to meet people where they are in Bitcoin, in fiat mindset, and the world of subjectivity. So, Alan, let's think a little fiat here. Um, how do you describe the value of Bitcoin to someone that is a, how do you quantify it in a number? Is it a price prediction? Is it in terms of number of human lives saved? Is it, what's the way at which you describe to someone? Is it, oh, it's going to be $10 million, or oh, it's going to save a million lives or whatever? Like,
Yeah.
how do you quantify it?
The way I would quantify it, well, like you said, it's different for everybody, right? I was talking to my wife today, and she said she was on Twitter, and she goes, "Man, a lot of people, some people are saying that Lynn Alden's broken money is better than the Bitcoin standard." And I said, "Blasphemy! How could you say such a thing?" But then I said, "You know what? Different people need different takes, or the Bitcoin standard was written for a certain individual. It resonated with me, might not resonate with somebody else. Maybe Lynn Alden's book resonates better with them. That's why I wrote my book, because hopefully it resonates with Christians. So this idea is, yeah, you got to meet people where they are and speak their language. So if I were, it depends who I'm talking to, but generally speaking, if I'm talking to somebody who's like me, maybe a friend, I would articulate it like this: that Bitcoin separates money from the states, and therefore is maybe one of the greatest catalysts for civil liberties there ever was. So if you can separate money from the state and have a money that's universal, that is borderless, that is censorship resistant, that will do more for human freedom and flourishing than any government could do in 1,000 years. So that's how I would quantify it in the expansion of freedom and liberty among the human race that Bitcoin could be the catalyst for.
Yep, yep. I often throw out big numbers like $1 million of Bitcoin or $100 million of Bitcoin, and I think that again appeals to people's fiat mindsets, and I often get criticism for that, right? In the same way this show get criticism for having a Christian centric emphasis, other people criticize me for having the clickbait, with the numbers, but it's like, you got to appeal to the Christians
Yeah.
where their worldviews, and you got to appeal to the people that are pricing things in terms of political dollars, the political dollar value of Bitcoin. And what you just said, Alan, is basically Bitcoin's going up forever, but with just a little less flair and a little more truth to it and more heart to it, but a little less, packaging and a bow on it, right? Because
Yeah,
that's
no
what you
one's gonna
said.
click the thumbnail that says what I said. They're gonna click the thumbnail that
Yeah,
said Bitcoin 2 1 and just as many zeros as you can fit in the thumbnail.
right, right. But the funny thing is that it's
So go
true.
ahead and clip me doing this.
Yeah,
Put like as many zeros as you
yeah,
could there.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, if what you said is true, Alan, the Bitcoin is going up and definitely in terms of political currency forever, the only question is timing and how fast. How
Yeah.
fast does the moral system become infinitely valuable in the immoral system,
Yeah, it's
right?
going up in terms of purchasing power forever. Even if it's not denominated in dollars, even if sats become the preferred denomination, um, you will be able to get more and more for less and less forever, basically. And that will slow down over time, right? I mean, it's not going to be, there's going to be a point where it will slow down to where, because if it does do that forever at this rate, then we're going to be chopping sats into micro super sats. And
Yeah,
maybe that happens, but I tend to believe there comes a time where it stabilizes to the point where you can save, say, over a lifetime, and that money that you save, those sats will get you more at the end of your life than they would at the beginning.
yeah, yeah. I would add on to that differently. I think Bitcoin's appreciation and value will slow down in terms of adoption, but as technological productivity increases, as the speed of change happens, I think that
Yeah,
will increase. So,
that's true. That's
um,
true. Yeah. And that
Alan,
goes up forever.
Yeah, it goes up forever. Yep. Well, Alan, thank you for joining me. Really appreciate it. Hope this has been useful for people. So thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to thank you for being a supporter of mine and a viewer of my channel here and a follower of mine. It really means a lot to me that you would support me in my efforts to expand Bitcoin education to a wider audience. And someone else that's doing the same here is my friend and fellow partner and supporter, Brian DeMint. Brian DeMint has done many efforts in Bitcoin here over the last few years, and this is one of them. This is his book. It's Bitcoin Evangelism. See, Brian was the former founder of a crypto project, and once he realized Bitcoin and why it's unique compared to other digital assets and other forms of tokens and money, he wrote this book. He wrote this book comparing why Bitcoin is unique in this sense. So no matter if you're new to Bitcoin, if you're trying to preach the message of Bitcoin, or you know someone that is a little more advanced, wherever your experience level, where you are, this is a book that's probably going to be very useful to you. The text is very readable, lots of bolded quotes from many people throughout history about why Bitcoin's unique, comparisons to former technology, and why Bitcoin is in a similar way. People are irrationally scared of it in the beginning, and lots of great visuals explaining various aspects about Bitcoin, the regular political currency and financial system, and why Bitcoin is most likely going to go up in purchasing power in the future. So again, whether you're new to Bitcoin, you're just trying to explain to someone why Bitcoin is unique compared to other crypto tokens, crypto projects, and political currencies, this could be a good visual aid for you to share to people with easy to readable text and great concepts in there as well. So if you want to continue to support me and you want to support someone else, Brian DeMint's book, Bitcoin Evangelism, I highly recommend you check it out. Thanks.